Hey, everybody, welcome to my guest tonight. I've got a great guest joining me tonight, author of Unflappable, Soaring Beyond a Diagnosis. We're going to be talking surviving cancer, becoming an author, paragliding.
He learned to fly through the clouds and the pain, turn his struggle to strength, sunshine through the rain, from skydiving dreams to stories on the page. Jonathan Hutton takes the stage. It's my gift tonight with Jeffrey Miller, a voice unflappable, strong and resilient, strongly brilliant, lifting hearts sky high. Tonight we learn what it means to fly. Come on.
I even left the crowd cheering in there. Yeah. Because I would imagine, like, if I'm sailing over like cornfields at sunset, like I want to be amped and pumped. There's a calmness to paragliding, but I also want to have some adrenaline, I think, so that I'm fully paying attention to everything around me.
Yeah, when you're new at it, there is no lack of adrenaline. I'll tell you that. Yeah. Thank you for the intro. Love it.
You're welcome. Well, and officially welcome Jonathan Hutton to my guest tonight. We're going to go back. We're going to tell some stories, see the bits and pieces of a history that makes Jonathan who he is today. We're going to talk about the new book. He's got a little bit of an announcement he just shared with me right before we went live. He's got something to show us. Jonathan, let's go back. Before authoring and paragliding, and tell us a little bit about where you came from and a little bit about your childhood. Where were you born at?
Yeah. Well, I was raised as an Army kid, right? So when I was a young adult, and people would ask me that question, like, "Where are you from? Where are you from?" I never really had a good answer because I was from a lot of places. From the time that I was born in Savannah, Georgia, in that area. We moved in the military all over the country, and we were abroad for a little while. And then I continued doing that after my dad retired, got out of the Army, and then by that time I was off to college and kept moving. Eventually, I returned to a place that I had discovered a semester away in school, which was the Pacific Northwest. Something about this part of the country stuck with me, and I decided to return here, and I've never left. So home for me now is Olympia, Washington. I write about kind of that whole origin story in the first couple of chapters in the book. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I'm from, how I got here to Olympia, and then there's the story of how I got into paragliding.
I mean, I totally get the area that you're talking about. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a mid-Atlantic. We're probably about the same latitude.
I used to live in Buffalo. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
we're
know.
probably about the same latitude, probably same temperature, maybe not the same amount of precipitation.
Yeah, we don't really get snow here, so I'm I'm kind of right situated near the Puget Sound, right? So we're at the same latitude, but our winters here very, very mild. So that's definitely a big difference from my years I spent in the Northeast and like Western upstate New York.
Yeah, Buffalo can be brutal, but that's one of the things about these areas. We do get to experience 4 seasons, even though yours is a little bit more mild because you probably have the South Pacific winds coming up the coast there, but you still get 4 distinct time, and that is something that is unique to the northern part of the United States is those seasons and those changes make a big difference in the quality of your life.
They do. Absolutely.
So you returned there. What were you studying in college?
I studied business and English. I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to do beyond I want to make more money than my dad made. And so I spent a little bit of time working in banking, and I realized I hated it and I was miserable. And I'm like, well, what the hell do I do with my life now? And right around that time was when the Great Recession happened. And so I kind of floated and did a lot of different things for a number of years. Kind of in that period of time was when I first tried skydiving, which is not paragliding, but I realized I absolutely loved it. The experience, doing a tandem skydive where you jump with an instructor, just a ton of fun. I went with a friend of mine, and as soon as we're on the ground, he's like, we have to do this again. We have to learn this. And so that kind of started a whole side quest, I guess you could say. At that point in my life, I didn't have the money to afford to continue to learn how to skydive. And I realized that the thing that I really loved was not falling in free fall, it was flying the parachute. And then I was like, is there a way to do that? It's like fly and soar. And in fact, there is. It's called paragliding. And so I learned about that, 13, 14 years ago. And I was like, I'm going to learn how to do that someday. I kind of put a pin in that in my mind. And yeah, and that was kind of the origin of something that is a big theme in the book, which is kind of that dream of learning how to fly, being in the sky, soaring, picking that back up and actually doing it.
Was the first time you went skydiving? Some people have a story like it was my 25th birthday, so I was going to do this, or a friend dragged me along. Was there a specific reason the two of you decided to go that day?
No, I don't think so. I think it was one of those things where we had a free day on the weekend. We weren't doing anything. And my buddy, Chad, who's one of those very charismatic people who can convince just about anyone to do anything. He was like, do you want to do it? And I was like, yes. So I was all in kind of right at the beginning. And then I was really convinced that it was something I wanted to do more of once I tried it for the first time.
And when you landed finally, what's that feeling like the first time you go through the process of leaving a plane, free falling, opening the chute and coasting to the ground? How does that feel when you first get to the ground?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that in two ways. When you first ever do something like that, especially skydiving, but to a lesser extent, paragliding, a lot of people, when they have that first experience, and for most people, it's the first and only experience, you're tethered to an instructor. But what tends to happen is it's just overwhelm. And your adrenaline and your energy is so high, you don't really get to savor it in the same way as when you become a student and you do it repeatedly. So, I think the experience for me that was really life-changing was when I was learning how to skydive as a student. You jump, there's an instructor over here, an instructor over here, but you all have your own parachutes that you're going to throw. And just that experience of all the nervousness, leaving the plane, and then you're it's so loud in free fall. It's just wind against your ears. You can't hear anything. And then you throw the parachute, and then in what feels like a split second, you're no longer falling, you're flying, and it's quiet. That was just otherworldly for me, and I knew that there was something special there. And then just kind of boating around in the sky under a canopy really unlocked something for me. And I was convinced I was going to do it again.
How long does it take to be a student before you can, go on with your own shoot, even though there's instructors with you? What kind of regimen is that? What kind of training?
For people who are really brave, you can have that sort of jump be your first jump, but it requires dedicating like a day, a half a day to training on the ground and practicing maneuvers and learning about reserve parachutes and automatic activation devices and what to do in certain sorts of events if the main chute doesn't open or opens all twisted up. So yeah, but for most people, what they do is they'll go into a tandem or two, and then they're like, oh, I want to do this. And then they enroll in a training program. And then you have to, I think it's called AFF, Accelerated Freefall. It's like 25 jumps or something like that. And you have to demonstrate certain skills, and then you get your kind of beginner license. Yeah.
And while you're studying parachuting, and you're kind of your mind is in the future thinking about paragliding, there's some changes in your health that start to happen, and maybe even before you went parachuting the first time. But there's some history here with your health that I think is important to the story, and especially the book that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it is. And in terms of timeline, 13 some years ago, dabbled in skydiving. And then it was more like a little over 10 years ago that I got a very unexpected diagnosis of really rare nasopharyngeal cancer. So for people who are like, nasopharyngeal what? Your nasopharynx is like this area behind your nose and above your jaw, like that general area. It's all kind of connected, and you'll hear people say like nasal, sinonasal, nasopharyngeal, all kind of referring to the same general area. But yeah, I didn't have any symptoms beyond I seemed to have allergies, like runny nose type allergies that never went away. And it was just annoying. And eventually I went to see an allergist. He's like, oh, you're just allergic to grass. Like, get some allergy shots. Like, get the fuck out of here. And I was like, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. And I eventually saw an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he, as they do, looked up my nose. I was like, there's a mass there. And that kind of began the whole journey, which has been, 10 some years over the course of like all of my 30s, dealing with this really kind of persistent cancer. So yeah, that kind of got in the way of the paragliding thing.
Well, that's good that you knew enough to like, something feels off here, something feels wrong. And even though you didn't have symptoms other than what looked like or represented like allergies, you're like, I've had allergies. I've been allergic to things before. This feels different. And you went out and got that second opinion, even though there wasn't like pain or discomfort or distortion of the face, and you on your own did that, and you got the right diagnosis, and you're able to get treatment or start treatment at that time. And tell us a little about that journey, because that getting that news isn't easy the first time, and there's been subsequent times.
Yeah. Yeah. The timing was just awful. I had just started a new job, and I was like, well, shit. I have not been here long enough to have any like protection for my job. Like, what am I going to do? Thankfully, that worked itself out. I still work for the same company.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great.
Yeah, they've really taken care of me in a lot of ways. In my cancer journey and my career journey, very much have a lot of parallels. But yeah, the timing was bad. I was like, well, shit, I'm newly 30 and I have this rare cancer that no one has heard of. I've never heard of anyone who has nose cancer, let alone rare nose cancer. And so I'm like, well, this might be the end. I've had some fun in my life. That's fine. I'm not going to stress about it. And then, yeah, I kind of jumped into surgery and treatment and spent a lot of time in Seattle, and that kind of started a whole other a whole other journey, which I talk pretty extensively about in the kind of middle section, first half of the book.
In some ways, sometimes accepting that is liberating. Like, this is the journey that I'm going to be on. I'm lucky I'm here today. you know I need to celebrate every moment of my life, and that's kind of your philosophy too. Like, every day is a great day to be alive. Like, yeah, I think I read a little something, if I could pull it up in my notes real quick. The presence and gratitude. You believe in the ability that the present is a gift, right? Especially given the limited amount of time that we have, the 4,000 weeks. And that's something that, yes, you have this diagnosis and you're going through these treatments, but I might have given you new perspective, or a whole new perspective on life.
Yeah, yeah, I think it definitely did. And one of the really valuable things that I learned, kind of reflecting back, and one of the reasons I think I wrote the book and decided to start waking up at 4 a.m. and trying to block out enough time and space in my life to take on a project like this was I wanted to understand what kind of the cumulative effect of those 10 years, how I had changed. I understood really acutely the physical things that had changed. And I talk about that quite a bit in the book. But I hadn't really spent a lot of time sitting and reflecting on how I had changed as a person. What were some of the things I had learned from the experiences of going through really awful treatment and recovering, having really serious reconstructive surgery, following some pretty awful side effects from radiation, how that had kind of changed my life. And so the book was really instructive in that I had to kind of unpack that for the reader, but also for myself. So yeah, but I do have a more articulate way of conveying really what I've learned, and I feel really lucky to have managed to scrape together the time and resources and the right people who kind of pointed me in the direction of, no, yeah, you should actually do that.
And yeah, and in the middle of all this, you had your eyes on the future, eyes on paragliding. Is during these treatments or in between where you're like, now I'm going full speed ahead into paragliding?
Yeah, actually, so it was about 2.5, 3 years ago. I had another recurrence and more surgery. This was kind of after having 2 really kind of life-altering surgeries to repair damage to my skull and my face that radiation had caused, and then I get cancer again. And I told my wife, I was like, you know what, I can't wait anymore after we get through this neck surgery and I'm recovered. I'm making this happen. And yeah, we did. I went part-time at work, and I was fortunate enough to be put in touch with some instructors in the Seattle area who are now like good friends of mine, people I talk about in the book. And I lived up there in Issaquah part of the week and just trained during that summer. And I had a lot of fun. It was more challenging than I expected, but it's really been massively rewarding. And yeah, the people I've met in the community of folks that do this, the places I've traveled to, and the perspectives, the things, the way that I've seen the world very literally from thousands of feet above the ground has really shifted how I think about life and my priorities, and it's been really, really a gift, like you said.
Is there a ceiling cap of how high you can go, or when you're up there, it's got to be meditative, just floating with the clouds? How high up do you go, and the higher you go, does it clear your mind more?
Well, so you start getting into the things that airplanes have to deal with, like airspace restrictions. But yeah, there is a ceiling, which is a function of the area you're flying in, the airspace. But one of the things I didn't really know heading into learning was there's kind of a whole other discipline in flying, which is finding the air that's rising and putting yourself in it and going up. That's how you have longer flights. That's how you do something I talk about in the book, which is called cross-country flying. That can be, depending on where you are and depending on the air, actually can be rough at times. Like you're in active air moving up. There are moments where it's still and quiet and you're just kind of soaring, but there are moments where you're climbing and you're moving, you're kind of getting tossed around a little bit. It can be in its own way meditative because you are so focused on what you're doing. You are not thinking about all of the things on your calendar that you're going to have to do tomorrow. You're not thinking about work projects. You're not thinking about anything else but being in that rising air, noticing things to help you stay in that lift, and then just going up and up and up and up. Yeah. The times that are really calm are when you're kind of flying in smooth air, just kind of moving around. And we have a number of terms for for what that's like in paragliding. You really, in some of those moments, I'll tell you about one. I was in Chelan, and there's an amazing flying site that's situated something like 4,000 feet above the ground level, and you launch off and you can soar above the Columbia River and see this whole valley from the sky above. And it really gives you a new appreciation for this beautiful place that we live in, and the birds and how they soar through the air. I'm absolutely convinced, having done this for a while, that everyone needs some sort of endeavor that takes you outside of yourself and makes you feel awe and a deep appreciation for the world around you. That kind of shifts your focus from the mundane things in life to something more profound. I think increasingly people and their fixation on these things do less and less of that. It's important to find ways, flying or otherwise, where you're outside and you're appreciating experiences that are kind of wholly physical and natural, and help you appreciate your surroundings and your humanity and your place in the planet we live on.
I see a lot of flights. I am fascinated by paragliding, and I hope once I heal up,
Do
I
it.
can. And we should also stress that just because you can buy these on Amazon doesn't mean somebody should just start doing paragliding. You
Oh,
spent a
hell
lot of
no.
time studying and researching and being instructed, but also a lot of the videos I watched, paragliding tends to be either early morning or late in the afternoon. Is the atmosphere actually calmer, or is that just when people's schedules line up with when they can paraglide?
That's an observation that not a lot of people who've never done this would make. So earlier in the morning, later in the evening, depending on where you are, in general, the air is going to be calmer, and that's a function of the sun, right? So the sun heats up the ground and things on the ground, and then what will happen is that warm air sucks in other air, and that turns into, and mind you, I am not a weather person. There's people in our sport really good at weather. That's not me. But basically, very simply, that is how a thermal forms. It will start on the ground with an area that gets warm, air comes to it, turns into a thermal, and that thermal, as warm air does, rises. This is also how clouds form, right? So warm air rises and then condenses into cloud. So, a lot of that activity, where you have the biggest, strongest thermals, is in the middle of the day. So beginners or people looking to only have very smooth flights, again, depending on the site, place you're at, only really fly in the calmer conditions in the morning later in the afternoon or evening. Yeah.
That's where I'll be. Not at like 2:30 in Florida, because every day in Florida you have like a 3 p.m. thunderstorm. It would be terrible to fly around
Oh, we don't.
two
Yeah, we
o'clock.
don't fly in thunderstorms. Yeah, that's a horrible idea. Horrible idea. There are some. I know there are some videos out there on the internet of people like getting sucked into clouds at like 18,000 feet and barely surviving. That is not the sort of thing you ever want to be doing. Yeah, when you train, you learn to be very attentive to the wind and the weather and the clouds and what those things are doing. So you don't go out flying when conditions could change and you could very easily get injured or killed. Yeah.
It's like a metaphor for life. Early in the morning's calm, it gets crazier, middle, and then towards the end it kind of fades out again. Uh,
Yeah.
and you shared with share with me right before we went recording that you did receive something in the mail today. We mentioned
Yeah.
the title already, Unflappable, Soaring Beyond a Diagnosis, but you only ever had a digital copy up until today. For those of you watching now, you're going to see maybe the first time on video. I don't know.
Let me turn the blurriness off on here. Yeah, so this is an advance um, proof copy of my book, which I'm really excited about. Um, you know, I I worked with a designer on the cover. I did all of the layout in the interior of the book. Um, I I gotta tell you, I was just over the moon to see it in physical form and hold it, and I knew roughly how thick, like the tactile part of it, really important to me. Um, you know, books that there's kind of a whole for some folks there's a whole stigma about like self-publishing a book and it's somehow lower quality. There's a lot of book snobs in the world. But I will tell you, wow, I'm just so delighted at the fit and finish, kind of the fact that the 200-page count really looks nice in this form. Yeah, I'm just like nerding out on
Well,
having
a
a
lot went into
physical
that
book,
book.
and I wrote it.
Yeah, it wasn't just the time it took to write it; it was the time it took to live it. When
Yeah.
do you have a release date for the hard copy, or can people get the digital copy now?
So I am going to have a pre-order that opens in early September. Um, there's still some unknowns about when the final print copy will be available for sale, but the likely release date is late September. But yeah, early September pre-order. I have some really special swag that will be available only in the pre-order. Um, if folks are interested in doing that and getting some of these special items that are exclusive, you can follow me on Substack because they're exclusive for my subscribers over there. Yeah, so pre-order early September. I'll have all of the details and dates announced over on my Substack. And yeah, I'm really excited. At launch, ebook, print, and audio will be available for folks. So I'm really excited about the audio. A friend of mine who's also a pilot who has a much better voice acting voice than I do is narrating it. So yeah, I'm excited to share it with people and it's been with some advanced readers, and the feedback has been really encouraging and uplifting. So, pun intended. Yeah.
And for those of you listening, it's unflappable.blog. You can go over, subscribe, get
Yeah.
on the list, make sure you get all the updates for when the book is ready, late September, October release date, possibly.
Yep.
Unflappable.blog.
Yeah. I'd also mention, I don't know if you have any listeners in the Seattle, Olympia area, but I will be doing some in-person events as well. So if you're here in Washington and would like to come attend a reading, I'll be announcing those details on my blog as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Jonathan, this has been so much fun. Let's get ready to rock out.
He learned to fly through the clouds in a pain. Turn his struggle to strength. Sunshine through the rain. From skydiving dreams to stories on the page. Jonathan Hutton takes the stage. It's my gift tonight with Jeffrey Miller, a voice unflappable, strong and resilient, strongly brilliant, lifting hearts sky high. Tonight we learn what it means to fly. Good night.
Oh, what's the ground speed of paragliding? I've seen some videos where, they come down maybe over a farm and they're moving at quite a clip. Like, what's the speed that you're actually going? I don't think it's just gliding. You can
Yeah.
actually make some distance.
So we have a speed that we refer to as trim speed, which basically means if you're flying in perfectly calm air with no wind behind you, or so no tailwind or headwind, that's your trim speed. And that really varies a lot on the glider. The type of glider I fly, which is more for an intermediate pilot, will do something like 24 to 28 miles an hour in like still air. Yeah. But most of the time, there is some wind. You want some wind because that's where the fun happens.